We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome back to Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by Mark Smith, who's the head of news for the Daily Record, and of course Ben Borland, the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. I feel like, again, Scottish politics is a bit like Groundhog Day, and with John Swinney playing the role of Bill Murray. There was a Scotland 2050 event this week, and the First Minister used that to make a speech about independence. He even said that independence is within reach. So let's just hear a little clip of what he said at the Edinburgh conference.
So yes, the Scotland of 2050 will be shaped by a series of unpredictable forces, by new technologies we've only half imagined in the pages of science fiction, by conflicts now only simmering, by people who are only just born. But it will also be shaped by us, by the decisions we take, the policy choices we implement, the vision and the path forward that we set out. That's a great responsibility, but for me it is also exciting, inspiring and a privilege to shape it as First Minister. So how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? A big part of the answer is ensuring that we are in charge of our own destiny, that we have our hands on all the levers we need to make the biggest difference. A fiscal squeeze better dealt with if we are fully in charge of our nation's finances. The complexities of navigating climate change much easier if we are in charge of energy policy and our vast energy resources. Making sure we have a big enough working population to meet the demands of an ageing population, more options, more solutions possible if we are in charge of our immigration policy or members once again of the European Union. As we look around our land in 2050, my hope is that we see a modern, dynamic Scotland, a compassionate, enterprising, forward-looking nation-state, back where it belongs, at the very heart of Europe. That we've taken the climate challenge seriously and seen it as an opportunity for a complete redesign of our ways of living. We are prey to a broken system and a failing economic model, a system that delivers for the very few at the very top, while living standards stagnate and real wages are squeezed for the vast majority. It means as a nation that we must try to thrive on what amounts at worst to poison pills and at best policy scraps from the UK table. All this when we have the capacity to stand and to flourish on our own 2 feet. I know there are many in this room who are not yet persuaded by the case for independence and others who will never be. I respect that. But independence is the defining choice for this generation. Have no doubt about that. Because the UK status quo has proved itself incapable of delivering on the hopes and the ambitions of the people of Scotland. That is why, like a clear majority of Scots, I believe our nation should have the right to choose our future. If this is a voluntary union, as Westminster politicians insist, then it is completely untenable that there is no mechanism for Scotland to leave the United Kingdom if it so wishes. Whether it is Keir Starmer, Kenny Badenoch or Nigel Farage, no Westminster politician should have the ability to deny Scotland her right to national self-determination.
So I was struck by that phrase that Swinney used when he said that independence is within reach, because it did have echoes of something Nicola Sturgeon said back in 2019, which was that independence is within touching distance. And of course, 6 years later, it's no further forward. So what do you think, Mark? I mean, was that a visionary speech that moved the independence debate forward, or was it just empty rhetoric designed to appease a restless base?
It was interesting that it was called the 2050 conference, because I think 20 to 50 seconds would have been enough to send me to sleep. For me, this was a conference that was maybe full of big ideas, radical ideas. I heard very little of that other than just platitudes. Now, I'm told there was a big box of Tunnock's tea cakes for everyone involved in the actual event. So maybe over a tea cake or two, they all discuss these big, massive ideas and radical ideas. I didn't see any of it. Luckily, I didn't have to go because I was stuck on my news desk here at the Daily Record. But I would have hoped that if this was the big independence button being hit by Swinney, that there would have been a more radical vision of independence up for discussion. He said the right things, and he talks about his hopes for an independent Scotland, but nothing concrete as to how we get there. And as for his very, strongly supportive of independence followers, what's in it for them? There's still no path to that goal. So for me, it lacked vision, and I'm not convinced that we're any nearer independence today than we were before the speech. I'm always amused as well when people say Swinney needs to hit the independence button, as if he's on Family Fortune and all he has to do is hit a button. Yeah, exactly. That's what it gets from me this time round. It's just, it seemed like rhetoric and nothing concrete in it. I would like to see a far more radical version of independence on the table. That might get the blood flowing.
Also, who gives a monkeys about 2050? They care about 2025 paying their bills. No one's thinking about 25 years down the line. I mean, also, you look at this through a political lens. The SNP, they lose the Hamilton by-election. There's mutterings about Swinney's leadership. Folk, not just on the left of the independence movement, but mainstream figures as well, they're restless about the lack of an independent strategy, and then lo and behold, John Swinney makes an independent speech. He's not talking to the country with this speech, he's talking to his own base.
Looks like
trying to keep his own coalition together.
Looks like it. I mean, it does look as though it's a response to Hamilton and the independence button quote that came out from sources in the SNP. And, this has been an opportunity to do it. It's such a lacklustre speech, though. I mean, 2050, I was struck by another quite divisive figure who has also set out his vision for 2050. Elon Musk wants to see a self-sustaining colony on Mars of 1 million people by 2050.
That's the express stance, isn't it?
And it's just, that's a genuine vision for the future. That's exciting. That's wow, this is where the century's going. John Swinney is taking us back 100 years. I mean, the SNP...
100 years?
Yeah, still, back to the 50s, back to, let's put a border between Scotland and England and that'll solve all our problems. It's such a backward-looking thing. You've got, on the one hand, the rest of the planet sort of dealing with the future that is coming. Swinney's still got this old-fashioned idea that creating an extra national border is somehow going to solve all of Scotland's problems.
I feel like, regardless of what your views on independence, the SNP have never really recovered from that Supreme Court judgment on independence, which categorically ruled that the Scottish Parliament cannot organise its own referendum. Because that basically meant that it's a reserved issue, it's not a devolved issue, and so they just don't know what their strategy is going to be anymore. This idea that if they win the Holyrood election, they'll have a mandate. Well, the UK government's simply going to say no, and just the last couple of years, there's been a lack of candour from SNP leaders in just explaining this point to their members. They just keep leading them up the garden path to give the impression that independence is round the corner, when the reality is that the UK government possesses a veto, and if they say no, there's nothing the SNP can do about it.
If I just make 2 points. Firstly, 2014, we were told this is a once-in-a-generation vote. And John Swinney seems to be positing sometime in the 2040s for the next referendum. I would say that's probably most people would accept a generation is 20 to 30 years. So really...
30 years, maybe 20.
30
is quite...
So 20 to 30, if you Google it, generally it's 20 to 30. Let's say 20 years. So, but we've wasted the past 11 years. So the first 11 years of this generation, when independence was supposed to be completely off the national conversation, have been spent obsessing over independence.
But the thing is, consistently the polls were getting between 50 and 60% support. You must agree with the proposition that it's up to the people of Scotland to decide. Or do you disagree with that proposition?
I agree that if there are consistent polls, 60 to 70%.
Just in principle, it's who should decide Scotland's future? The guy number 10 or the people of Scotland?
I always liked the plan. I think Tom Harris drew it up actually with the last Tory government, and he said there should be a path, and it perhaps should be put into legislation.
There needs to be a path.
That there is a path, but
Yeah.
it's a high. There's a bar to be cleared, and make it a high bar, and then at least there is. So yeah, in principle, I do agree that you can't forever say no.
That's the thing. Whoever's in number 10, whether it's Farage, Starmer, or Kemi Bedrock, as if that's going to happen, they have at the minute the right to say no, even if there's overwhelming support for Scottish independence. Even if you don't support Scottish independence, as I know you don't, you can't possibly say that a nation should be held captive by some legal nicety. If the demand is there, we cannot deny Scotland's people the right to determine their own future. And I think it's a dangerous game for any Prime Minister to play to try and deny that forever.
That's right. But there was a referendum triggered. It was triggered by a Holyrood majority.
Mm-hmm.
The SNP have never managed to achieve a Holyrood majority since.
Yeah.
Were they to do that? I mean, 2021, Sturgeon was very close. Had she had two more MSPs,
Could have been there again.
Once that precedent was set by Cameron,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of hard to end in it. I think you've still probably until the 20 years are up. I think you can probably still justifiably say
No.
we're still within the generation.
You love the word no, eh?
I do. Yeah. No thanks. No thanks. I was
That was it. No.
I mean, I think, Labour and the Tories have been kind of careful not to rule it out forever. They've given different versions of now is not the right time, not now. They're not. I don't think they would ever agree to Indie Ref 2. I just don't, given their experience of the first referendum in 2014, I can't see them doing it again. But they're not stupid enough to say to Scots, you're never having one. They're kind of dangling the prospect that maybe one day in the distant future it will happen again.
No one wants to hear about Keir Starmer dangling.
I'll never use that phrase again.
Thank you.
But I do think, in terms of a plan B, I think support for independence does have to increase substantially for the sort of moral case for independence to be put on the table again. And I wrote a piece about this yesterday. I think that the SNP's case does depend on the Labour government failing. If the Labour government fails and Farage ends up as Prime Minister, you will see support for independence soar.
We all know that Nigel Farage is the greatest recruiting sergeant for Scottish independence. I think most people would rather see independence for Sighthill or anywhere than having to put up with Nigel Farage. Your paper obviously loves Farage, thinks he's the new messiah. I would argue that he's the very guy that's going to get us. This country is going to be torn asunder by that guy. Workers' rights disappearing, tax breaks for the super rich, all the things we've fought for since 1945, NHS, welfare state, gone, so that this guy can basically run the country as he pleases. He's going to be a disaster. And if he gets anywhere near power, I tell you what, there's going to be a massive upsurge in support for independence. And it's going to be really hard to argue against it if it looks like he's going to be Prime Minister.
I think we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves.
The opinion poll show he's in like the next PM. I mean,
I think he's, it's a long way off the next general election.
Actually, on that, are you not actually helping the cause of independence by, promoting reform, by backing them in the Hamilton by-election?
Well, I don't.
You know.
See, I'm going to take issue with you there, Mark. The Hamilton by-election showed that 1/3 of the electorate backed reform, voted for reform. So they can't be that, appalled by Farage. That's a significant chunk of the population.
2/3 didn't, though.
2/3 didn't, but this is sort of fertile. It's old industrial towns. This is fertile ground for both the SNP movement, the independence movement and Labour, it's kind of where they're fighting it out. This shouldn't have been where the reform surge happened.
You know, take his point though. Let's imagine Labour government fails and there's a reform government after the next general election. Would that not fuel support for independence?
I think it would change everything. And you know, we backed reform in Hamilton on a tactical voting basis. My view and the Express's view is still that the Conservative approach is the best approach. I'm not sure the party's got everything, particularly at a UK level, have got everything where it should be at the moment. But Nigel Farage has been kind of wobbly on independence. He said he'd actually rather see the SNP continue in power than Labour.
I think Farage secretly would love to see Scotland cast off so that he can run England and Wales and maybe Northern Ireland, see what happens there, as his own little fiefdom, where he's got a lot of support among all classes of people. And I think he secretly quite likes the idea of Scottish independence. I think secretly he quite likes the idea of breaking up Britain, because I think that would make him more secure in his political ambitions. He would do anything to get into power, including breaking up Britain. I don't know why you have anything to do with him. I don't know why you backed him. He's a dangerous man.
I think, I know quite a few people in England who were Brexiteers, and there's quite a common view there is, I don't see why Scotland wouldn't want, because they viewed Brexit as independence from Europe. And so there are sort of these commonalities between the two campaigns. I think, though, with Farage and Reform generally, it's more I know they say they're not a protest vote party. It's still a protest at the state of the country. The state the country's got itself into. And I just think as the next election comes around, the Tories stage a recovery, I still think that we will be back to the two-party system. And whether it's Kemi Badenoch or not, I don't know. But the next Prime Minister will be either Keir Starmer or the leader of the Conservatives.
Well, on that subject, obviously the Tory party is the real lost cause of this conversation. They had their conference a few days ago. It was a really healthy backdrop. They went down from 17 to 6% in the by-election. Opinion polls show them losing over half of their MSPs, and they seem to be losing an endless amount of councillors to Reform. So, are you ready to ditch these losers and back Reform?
No, like I say, we're standing by the Scottish Conservatives. I think you've always got to bear in mind Murdo Fraser's bid to split the two parties has never got off the ground, but it is that they are a separate entity, really. The Scottish Conservatives have always had
they get their money from down south.
They've always had a slightly different take on policies. I still think they are a separate organisation in that Russell Finlay runs that party. If he wants to pick a policy, pick a stance, it's up to him to do so. There's no question they're having a rough time at the moment. They're being squeezed by Reform. I think I've said on here before, the best thing that could actually happen might be if independence became an issue again, because they're still the party that's seen as the safest bet for the union. That could help.
I almost feel a bit sorry for them.
Really?
But then I remember about all the mining communities that were destroyed, all the poverty that swept through Scotland when they were in charge, and the fact that they're unrepentant about all of that and would do exactly the same again when they get into power. Cameron, gave us Brexit. Then we got Boris. I just think the Scottish Tories are doomed. And if anyone deserved to be doomed, it's the Scottish Tories. Good riddance. And if this is the start of the end for them, I don't think anyone will shed any tears.
How would you respond if the Scottish Tory party died?
The words dancing and grave spring to mind.
I think that when political parties struggle, you always get this apocalyptic talk of, are they going to come back? Is it over forever? And you look at what happened with Labour after 2019 and Corbyn, it looked terrible for them, it looked terminal. But they came back and they won. But I do feel it does seem a bit different for the Conservatives. Reform are just doing so well just now. They've stolen the Tory clothes. They don't have the baggage of having been in office and failed. It looks really bleak for them, and Reform might be the new Tory party, and the old Tory party might be headed for the exit.
Well, I honestly think you two are kind of a bit of wishful thinking going on here. Already declaring the official His Majesty's opposition to be doomed
We'll bear it
and
bravely
finished.
if it happens, okay? We'll bear it bravely.
Okay, I mean, I like I say, I think rumours of the Tory demise are greatly exaggerated, and
If they're not pushing up daisies, they're almost there.
they're.
I think their future is basically a glass cage in the National Museum of
I mean,
Scotland.
but this happened the last time Labour were in power. You know, the Tories were finished. You had this succession of leaders, and it was doom and gloom. And
Can you see there maybe being some coming together between Reform and the Tories? In a way, it's in both of their interests to say, you know what, Nigel, you just take over. We'll have a coming together of Reform and the Tories. We're both going for the same ideological side of the argument. Let's just put Nigel in charge of the Tory party and they can have a beautiful marriage.
I genuinely can't. I really can't. I think
What's in it for Reform?
Farage thrives on being the outsider, and to become the leader of the Conservative Party be the ultimate insider. Just think.
He wants to kill them. He doesn't want to be part of them. Farage.
But he might do the maths. He might look at the maths and go, hang on a minute. If I could somehow create some sort of electoral alliance here, that might be my path to power. He might do the maths.
I think we might see an electoral alliance rather sooner. I mean, we might see one next year between the Tories and Reform.
So there might be a sort of non-aggression pact between them, not to
Well,
stand in. Farage obviously has got his eye on these big northern seats. The Farage might do better in Scotland than the Tories. Or could we see a Scotland where the Tories don't stand because Farage has got
No, I think what you might see is, I think Reform and the Tories are probably in a scrap for third place, and I think the Tories will get third place, and I think that'll give them the driving seat. That'll give Russell Finlay the right to say, right, I've got the bigger bulk of MSPs.
Yes.
I'm going to back Anna Sawar for First Minister, and it puts Farage in the position of where he said, I'll put the SNP back in. But, if we end up with a hung parliament and you've got the Lib Dems on board, the Greens will obviously just instantly flip and support Labour. And the Tories, I think, will probably unofficially back a Labour First Minister rather than the SNP. Then
If they've got
give Farage a
MSPs.
choice.
If they've got MSPs. I mean, right now, people just do not want to hear from the Tory party. It was a bit like Labour in 2010. They'd been in for so long. They'd lost their right to be heard. We're still in that space with the Conservatives. Folk remember what they did in office, and that's why they're attracted by Reform.
Well, it's only a year. We're not even a year into this new government. There's 5 years, and Starmer's going for a second term. You're probably looking at 2035 before the Tories get a realistic shot at a return. So they're a long way off power. I mean, what the country will look like then, maybe we need to ask John Swinney with his crystal ball. He's obviously has a vision of 2050.
You should set up a 2035 conference.
2035. Well, yeah. I mean, that is probably the next.
Get plenty of Tunnock's tea cakes in.
I think it's a bit defeated. I mean, the Tories are never going to admit we don't have a chance next time.
Yeah.
I don't personally think Farage will win in 2029. Again, I've said before, I think since the turn of the year, I think Starmer's done a lot better.
Who would you prefer running the UK government, Starmer or Farage?
I mean, given Farage's, that's a tough question. I'd like to see Farage have more influence. I think it's better the devil you know, to be honest.
You want Farage to have more influence?
Better the devil. Does that mean Starmer then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you heard it here first.
some sort of role for I think people should listen to Farage.
Like
I think,
ambassador for Belize or something.
I think he should. What he says is what
You can't want Farage to be anywhere near power, surely.
But
I mean, the man will
does
do and
speak
say
for all
anything.
this huge mass of the public who really aren't happy with how things are going.
There's a howl of rage at the way politics is going across the UK. That's undoubtedly true. But Farage, if Farage is the man who cashes in on that rage, we all know where that's going, and it ain't good.
But you could argue that the Labour government is already listening to reform and is already being influenced by Farage. Grooming gangs inquiry, January it was far right to even call for one, and now suddenly it's happening.
The way that Labour can combat Farage is to ignore him and all these racist rubbish that he comes out with, get it in the sea.
Deliver Labour policies.
But it's not racist to say that
No, I'm not
immigration's
saying.
too
Well,
high.
I'm not saying it's racist to want lower immigration and to want net migration cut.
Farage is a past master at scapegoating minority communities and minority groups all the time. And Labour, if they start playing that game, are going down a very dark path. And I think they'd be well advised to ignore Farage and all his nonsense. And by the way, anyone who thinks that Farage could be like quite a decent guy in power, or could actually maybe make, some decent policy, contributions, what a load of rubbish. If he gets anywhere near power, I tell you what, he's going to be he would be an absolute disaster. And I think all of us who value, society, cohesion, all the lovely things that we all like, if you really value it, ignore Farage and don't copy him, get rid of him.
You mentioned 2026, Ben. I mean, right now, if you had to predict it, it's too hard to call, isn't it? I mean, you've got an unpopular SNP government, a fairly unpopular Labour government. I mean, this election is shaping up to be an unpopularity contest.
It is, but then again, you've got to draw the dividing line between Scottish Labour and UK Labour. They are two sides of the same coin, perhaps, but Scottish Labour are a different party. They haven't been in power for 18 years. And on the principle of everything's broken, give someone else a go to fix it, the only solution is give Anna Sauer and Jackie Bailey a go at fixing the schools, the hospitals, the roads, council budgets. And there's no one else in a position to do it. Russell Finlay, I'm sure if he spoke to him privately, would say, look, I'm not going to be the next First Minister. No. The leader of reform in Scotland, whoever it may be, isn't going to be the next First Minister. It's a choice between two people. And one of them represents a party that's had 20 years.
You're right. Look, devolved election.
Someone else will go.
Devolved election should be about devolved issues, about the NHS, schools, and it should be about the record of the devolved government. But
that's where Labour's opportunity lies.
Yes, but if Scottish voters want to make it about something else, if they want to use it as a protest vote about the Labour government, they're perfectly entitled to do that. It's really who owns the frame of the election, who's in charge of the lens of it.
That's Anna Sauer's big historic challenge. Can he pick up that baton and really lay it into the SNP government for their failings on health, education, the attainment gap, all these things that make a difference to people's everyday lives? Sauer needs to find a way to really engage the Scottish electorate and say, right, I can make it different for you in your everyday life. And he has to, if he can, try and avoid the squeeze that's getting put on him by Farage on one side and the Tories, and the SNP on the other hand. They both represent certain strains of identity politics. Sauer's big challenge, and if he succeeds, I think he might actually just surprise us all and win that election. If he comes through the middle and manages to paint a vision of Scotland which the voters like, I reckon you could see the SNP start to lose constituency seats. Who knows what would happen?
That's what they need to lose constituencies. That's the key.
Yeah. But we've seen in Hamilton that can indeed happen. Yeah.
I think the thing is with the SNP, they're so good at controlling the narrative, like you say. If anything, anything negative that happens can be spun as the UK government's fault. Anything good that happens can be spun as their, as they're doing. So even if Starmer does stage a recovery and the UK government's more popular by next May, it still won't be the shoo-in that Labour would get in here, because the SNP is so good at saying, well, anything good that happened, that's because of us.
Yeah.
I think a strong card for Labour is the fact that come the next election, the SNP will be in power for, what, 19 years?
19
Do
years.
you really want a quarter of a century of one political party in power? I mean, just for democracy's sake, that just doesn't sound healthy. And I think that that message of change and renewal will chime with a lot of
Which
voters.
takes us back to 2050, that conference. I would have hoped in a conference of that type, we might have seen the big names, the big new names coming in Scottish politics, like Joni Reid, for example, from the Labour Party, who I think comes up with some really good big ideas. I didn't really see any youthful voices in that conference talking to what the SNP might become. No radical voices. I mean, I was reminded of people like Jim Sullers, who were massive independence figures, you know, and had big ideas about how Scotland could look. I just didn't see any of that coming through. And I do wonder if that's the SNP's problem, is a lack of vision. And come the next election, that might cost them.
Yeah, I mean, any party that's been in for 18, 19 years, it's inevitable it's going to be stale.
Yeah.
It's just, how can you portray yourself as a force for change and renewal if you've been in power for 20 years? It's simply impossible.
You made a point the other week, Paul, I think, and let's say that Labour finished as the biggest party in a hung parliament. They do have a choice. Do they go to the Tories, reform, and say let's have a pro-UK alliance, or could there be a Labour SNP, super majority?
Depends if reform are strong. If, reform win 20, 25 MSPs and it looks like the right wing is becoming stronger, then, I mean, the SNP will never go into coalition. I don't think they'll ever do a formal deal, but you might see looser partnerships between both parties.
Which do you think Labour would prefer?
Of
a pro-UK alliance or
I mean, it's
progressive
neither are
alliance?
particularly attractive to Labour, I think, particularly if you have to. I mean, dealing with the Conservatives would be difficult enough for Labour. Having to throw in reform as well, I mean, that's just...
They're just never going to win enough seats to get a government with the Lib Dems and the Greens.
No.
They're just not.
It's going to be chaos, isn't it?
It's going to be
It's going to be
good,
completely ungovernable, and the winners will be us, the journalists.
We'll just keep writing about it, see what happens.
All right, okay, that wraps it up. Thanks again to Mark and to Ben for joining me. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.